welcome to Arts Express. This is Prairie Miller, and on the show, Pacifica host Garland Nixon on the politics of personality, cults, narcissists, sociopaths, and looking in the mirror.
Hello, Garland Nixon here. And, if you follow me, I refer to both parties as brainwashed cults, but Democrats are making it easy. Come on, guys. Make me work for it a little bit. Don't make it this easy. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here. All right, let's get going. So where are we? If you've been following me for years, I'm an independent. I was a Democrat. I believed the Democrat stuff. I believed it was the party that best aligned with my cultural and social and beliefs and that kind of stuff, right? I thought the Democratic Party was the cat's pajamas, right? Oh man, this is going to be great. I'm a member of the Democratic Party. And around 2016, I thought Bernie was different. Maybe he'd do things different. And so I thought, okay, this is my candidate. And you know the rest. They robbed Bernie, and Bernie just came back and said, let's support the party that just robbed me. And I got disenchanted and I left. And I said, okay, I'm a Democrat. I'm obviously to the left of the party. Actually, I believe in consistency and justice, right? Consistency. If you say that you believe in democracy, democracy it is. But once you show me that you don't believe in democracy, don't have a summit for democracies like Joe Biden did. Look, you don't believe in democracy. Fine, it's who you are, but don't pretend like you do. Don't steal the election from Bernie in 2016 and then come back and say we're defending democracy. Democracy's on the ballot with it. You don't practice democracy in your own party. You cannot defend democracy if you don't practice it, right? So I knew there was a level of hypocrisy and denial that was unmatched in today's political sphere. You're really going to say you're for democracy? So that should have been a hint as to how we were going to get where we are. Right? Because if there's one thing I believe in, it is consistency. If you believe in something, stand for it. Don't stand for it when it's convenient to stand for it. Stand for it. And if you change your mind about something, okay, based on facts, based on a change within yourself, whatever, based on some self-actualization or self-awareness, I've looked into my heart and I realized I was wrong and I'm moving, I'm changing, or I want to go a different direction. Great, fine, excellent, no problem with that. But because you lost, all of a sudden you changed. Unbelievable. So let's start here. So basically, why am I doing this video? Because I'm ready to tear my eyes out, cut my ears off, burn myself to death, and jump off a cliff. The hypocrisy is without equal. And I look at them and I think to myself, if you study the holy triad or whatever it is, right? The evil triad. If you understand what creates narcissists and sociopaths and psychopaths and that ilk, right? But one of the factors, one of the elements that shows itself over and over again is an inability to evaluate oneself, a lack of self-awareness, an inability to look in the mirror and say, am I doing things that I shouldn't do? Should I really ask myself, how are you? What are you doing? How are you acting? Is that okay? And if somebody says to you, hey, Garland, you're being hypocritical, do I just say, screw you, drop dead? Or do I say, interesting. That's a criticism of me. Perhaps I should consider that criticism instead of just automatically and react and in a way of just instant reaction, say you're wrong and defend myself. Perhaps I should ask myself, everybody's telling me I'm a jerk. Maybe I am. Everybody's telling me you drink too much, or everybody's telling me you're neglecting your family, your children, or everybody's telling me you're too snappy, you got a bad attitude. Everybody's telling me something about myself. You're hard-headed, you won't listen. Perhaps I should listen. Perhaps I should do some self-evaluation, right? Narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths, not only they don't do that, they don't care and they're unable to do that. They are emotionally unable to do self-evaluation. And I'm looking at the Democrats and I'm like, can you possibly evaluate yourself? Look, if they watch this, you know what they'll do? If a bunch of Democrats watch this, you think they're going to like say, you know, Garland, you got a point there. Perhaps we look like hypocrites. Oh, hell no. They're going to get mad at me. Look at him. He's a Trumpster. I had this. I'm going to be kind because this guy called my radio show in Washington, D.C. And when he called it, you know, I appreciate anybody who watches my stuff or listens to my show. So, you know, I was friendly to him, but my head was shaking a little bit. But he says to me, I think you're a Trump supporter. And I said, you've been listening to my show a while? He said, yeah. I said, well, then you know I'm an independent. And you know that I don't support Trump or I don't oppose Trump. I'm not in the politics of personality. As Frederick Douglass says, I'll join with any man with good and no man for evil. My politics is if Trump does something that I agree with, I'll support it. If he does something that I oppose, I'll fight against it with all the might that I have. That's me. I said, so I don't support Trump. You understand that? He says, yes. I said, but you consider me a Trump supporter? Yes. A Trump supporter who doesn't support Trump. Okay. I said, okay, let's continue. And once I just wanted to establish that, you know, when I do radio, I don't have to prove anything to a caller or to anybody I'm debating with. I let the audience decide. I believe in people's ability to discern information and based on their roadmap in their brain to figure it out. And when the people hear Garland talking to a caller and the guy says, I consider you a Trump supporter. I understand that you don't support Trump, but I think you're a Trump supporter. I think the audience can figure that out. Who's the more rational person in this discussion? Who is in fact the good faith actor in that discussion? And if they can't, it is what it is. They're probably, I don't know, they're like that guy. They'll consider me a Trump supporter who doesn't necessarily support Trump. They don't get it. Okay.
And coming up next on Arts Express, stand-up comedian, actor, author, and musician Tommy Davidson has chosen as one of his many hats on the show this week his stunning, very personal musical collaboration with Earth, Wind & Fire on Stronger, revisiting through song his difficult life struggle from an abandoned baby to In Living Color, Spike Lee's Bamboozled, and many other productions, along with memorable moments on stage, opening for Patti LaBelle, Kenny G, and Luther Vandross. And most vividly, quote, to have a song with Earth, Wind & Fire is a miracle. Davidson in a conversation about all of this. But first, let's give a listen to Tommy Davidson making music with Earth, Wind & Fire with Stronger.
Hey, this is Tommy Davidson. I'm here at Sunset Sound to give you some sound. This is my new single called Stronger, done with some beautiful musicians you might be familiar with. Stronger is for me and you. All right. A lot of people think they know me, but deep inside, they really don't. All right. Now life is filled with ups and downs, but let me tell you a little story. I was born with no silver spoon, 'cause my mama left me in the trash. But I don't blame her, I know God forgave her. When Barbara came to rescue me, all my life would never be the same. She gave me a family, frowned upon by society. Alright, ask me how I feel. Ask me how I feel about my life. Ask me how I feel. It just made me stronger, so I could love life more. It just made me tougher, so I could rise and soar. colorblind, yet the world had a different take. So much confusion, black and white delusions. Had a talent to make people laugh, oh yeah. But deep inside I was hurting bad. You can't shake your history, you gotta face your destiny. Alright, ask me how I feel. Ask me how I feel about my life. Ask me how I feel. It just made me stronger, so I could love life more. It just made me tougher, so I could rise and soar. Somebody's really watching over me, even when it's too hard to see. So hard, it just made me stronger, so I could love you more. When your winter comes and life turns bitter cold, never lose your faith. Be strong, be bold, be It just made me stronger. It just made me stronger. It just made me stronger, so I could love life more. It just made me tougher, so I could rise and soar. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Somebody's really watching over me, even when it's too hard to see. It just made me stronger, so I could love you longer. So I could love life more. It just made me tougher, so I could rise and soar.
Hello.
There you go.
Greetings, Tommy Davidson, and welcome to our show.
Thank you so much.
What is your musical collaboration Stronger all about? And how did your collaboration with Earth, Wind, and Fire come about?
It came about for 35 years of being in Hollywood and being around the best artists, musicians in the world. And a friendship that I picked up when I first got to LA before I was even on TV. And that kind of snowballed into a collaboration years and years later when I decided I'm going to go into the music industry. And, you know, the members of Earth, Wind, and Fire, I've known them for years, and they love the song. A few of them asked, can we get involved? They got involved, and now I got this song, and it's a miracle. To have a song with Earth, Wind, and Fire is a miracle. And for a little boy from Silver Spring, Maryland, to get an album doing a song with that very group, families are most important. Families are important. And we found a way to have our families get along in our schools and in our workplace for the 200 and some odd years we've had this country. So I'm giving this song to them.
And what can you say about your choice of Earth, Wind, and Fire? What it meant to you growing up, listening to them, and being inspired yourself by their music?
The music was all uplifting. It was all about, you know, learning how to live in truth, learning how to express yourself the best you can. You know, learning to work with others, learning how to have joy, learning how to celebrate happiness. You know, with this song "Yearn and Learning," I could just name the songs that make you feel happy right away. Shining Star, You're a Shining Star. Your music was mostly about you and about how much they wanted you to enjoy your one-way ride on this life. They wanted you to have a great life, not a good life. And thanks to them, I got a great life. So this is the best way, is to express my music the way they did. I can never express it as good, because they're the best, but I'm a piece of them.
And what do you feel you can bring to listeners and audiences through your music at this time, with a divided country in turmoil following the election?
I can let the country know that you can't divide us unless you crack us in the middle of the country and we float into the ocean. We're dependent on each other, and we have been from the very beginning. Politics never changed communities and neighborhoods and workplaces. Only people can change that. So it's a big falsehood that we're divided, which is a device by one of the sides to get the votes. You know, once that person gets in the White House, we have the same issues. You know, how are we going to feed our families? We get them fresh water. How are we going to get good education? We get along and love each other. And that's the truth.
And please talk about the cover for Stronger and its significance. You standing on a slave plantation and those toiling in the cotton field in the background.
And then what's in the background, way in the background, don't forget that. Way in the background on the left is Washington, D.C., modern Washington, D.C. And also the other cover is the cover of the young lady who actually went to the school for the first time. You know, and that message is we've come a long way as a country from very brutal ways of getting here, very brutal ways of living here, surviving the best that we can. And here we are in today's world acting like we're not tied at the hip. So my offer to everybody was, we got to be stronger than that. We got to be stronger like we were in the World War II. We all be speaking Japanese and German right about now wouldn't we? Got to be stronger in the pandemic, didn't we? Got to be stronger against polio. This country has always had to work for our unity. Nothing's changed. It's still the same. We're happy. Today is Tuesday. Last I looked. You know.
Yeah.
And if I wasn't here, you wouldn't be hearing me, and if you weren't, you wouldn't be listening.
And what was it like first starting out as the opening act for Patti LaBelle and Luther Vandross, and your memories of them?
They helped me become the superstar I am today. And it wasn't because they were superstars, it was because I watched the way that they worked. And every night they gave it 100%. Luther Vandross ended up being a lifelong friend, and he always emphasized rehearsal, rest, work your hardest. Just like Mr. Thomas used to do when I worked at the hospital at Bethesda Medical. And I'd be up in the mornings with him when I was 16 in the freezer, stacking product in the freezer. Because you're going to be working all your life. So you might as well start now doing it right.
And what can you say about another production of yours, Lausanne, that musical production, Let's Clean Up the Ghetto, Smooth Jazz Life?
Oh, man. I wanted to remind Americans that we're no different than we were in the 50s. We're no different as far as family goes, as far as work goes, as far as our dreams, you know? It's why I love the movie Grapes of Wrath so much. It's because that movie isn't about white people. The movie is about people who were trying to get their family fed, and they had the dreams to keep them going. That's what Stronger is all about.
Any last word about Stronger?
Yeah. If you have a chance to listen to it for the reason I got you listening to it. Listen to it because I love you and I want you to live a life of value. I want you to live a life of giving. And I want you to be successful in all your endeavors. I want you to give love to the next person, man. Listen to it for those reasons.
Okay, thank you so much, Tommy Davidson, for joining us on the show. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Somebody's really watching over me, even when it's too hard to see. It just made me stronger, so I could love you longer, so I could love like more. It just made me tougher, so I could rise and soar. Somebody's really watching over me, even when it's too hard to see. It just made me stronger.
And coming up next on the show,
30,000 inmates spread across more than half of California's state prisons refused to eat their breakfast.
I had resigned myself to death in a windowless concrete box. How do you fight that?
Hi, this is Jack Shalom. Today, part 2 of our fascinating conversation with JoeBill Munoz and Lucas Guilkey, directors of the recent film documentary, The Strike. The Strike is the true story of the hunger strikes by the prisoners incarcerated in solitary confinement at Pelican Bay Supermax Prison in San Francisco during the period 2011 to 2015. Last week, in part 1, we talked about how prisoners could be sent to solitary for an indefinite amount of time, sometimes even several decades, without any way to get out, merely because they had been validated as gang members. A prisoner could be branded a gang member merely by the books they were reading, and once you were validated, as the term goes, you were sent to the security housing unit known as the SHU, or SHU, for decades. The only way you could get out was by pointing to some other prisoner as a gang member to replace yourself in solitary. Well, we left off last week with a question I asked our guests about race in the prison system. So now, part 2 of our conversation with JoeBill Munoz and Lucas Guilkey, directors of The Strike. I know this may seem tangential, but I couldn't help noticing that all the wardens, all the planners, all the architects, and basically all the government officials were white. Do you want to comment on that?
I think a lot of it speaks for itself. You know, we talked to one official in the film, Scott Kernan, who grew up on the grounds of San Quentin. He grew up, his mother was a warden in San Quentin. And, you know, I think we see with a lot of these administrators, there's a lot of family ties. It's a fairly insular network. You know, when you go back to the 60s, you see white guards coming from the South, you know, policing a largely Black population in many ways. And I think a lot of the racial dynamics of the United States and the history of the United States are very present in the prison system. And I think that plays out very much in this story as well. Although I think it's important to remember as well that the hunger strikes were multiracial, Black, white, and Latino primarily, but there was widespread support inside the prison system.
One thing I really loved about the film was that you show not only the struggle of the men incarcerated, but also the lives of the people on the outside tirelessly working on their behalf, including people like Dolores Canales. So tell us about her.
Dolores and many other family members founded a group at the time called California Families Against Solitary Confinement, fighting on behalf of their loved ones. And it was mostly women, Latino women from Los Angeles, fighting on behalf of their husbands, sons, brothers, dads who were in these conditions, and really became the heart and soul of the movement on the outside. Folks were often becoming politically active for the first times in their lives, protesting outside government buildings, going to Sacramento, speaking to the legislature, really becoming the voice of their loved ones on the inside. And a lot of folks really contributed to this movement. And in many ways, the family members were the heart and soul of it outside of the prison.
I understand that the inmates did listen to radio, and that one radio show that they listened to was Democracy Now!, heard here on WBAI and Pacifica stations. And there was also one local station, KSHU, too, where Dolores Canales and others could communicate with prisoners. Could you talk about the importance of that?
Yeah, I think, you know, as filmmakers studying this movement and studying solitary confinement, we're really interested in the cracks of the armor of solitary. And,
Exactly.
You know, how do people maintain their humanity and maintain their connection with the outside world, maintain their relationships? A big one is mail, letter writing. You talk to a lot of folks, the intimacy of letter writing is a huge one. But another really powerful one is radio. There's a woman in Humboldt. She had a soul radio show that she played every Sunday afternoon. And a really powerful thing she did is she would allow family members, again, mostly from Los Angeles, call into the show and give shout outs to their loved ones through the radio program. So there's all these little forms of resistance that I think are really important that sustained people over the decades and helped ultimately lead to the hunger strikes.
I want to ask, how the heck did the word spread about the hunger strike in 2013 to 30,000 California prisoners?
It's a great question. And I think the size even surprised those who originally called for it. And, as we heard from folks in the film, no one expected it to be as big as it was. And as JoeBill mentioned, this is something that developed over the years, the political consciousness raising, the unity, the finding similarities in each other. And so there were 2 hunger strikes in 2011. The first one was 6,000. That surprised everybody. The second one was 12,000. Wow, it's growing. And at that point, the prison system promised to make reforms. And so we went through a 1.5 year period where reforms were sought to be made. Everyone was following along. And when those reforms were insufficient, the hunger strike was called again. And I think by that point, the word had spread through the mail, through prison newsletters, through these outside family networks and activist networks, through media and alternative media. And I think a lot of people inside the prison system who were not in solitary saw the injustice of the system and saw the power of solidarity. And that's how we had 1 in 4 people incarcerated in California participate.
Wow. And the really thrilling thing I thought in the film was to see that the strike became news internationally and that there was solidarity with Palestinian prisoners. I mean, this is back in 2013. It was just extraordinary to see that.
Yeah, at the time, people were on hunger strike in Guantanamo Bay and also in Palestine. Of course, this has also been happening for years, but there was explicit connections being made between all of them. And I think this also connects back to Bobby Sands. Yes, he's white, but I think these are also all under the realm of anti-imperialism on some level and international solidarity of fighting systems of oppression. And it was really powerful to witness those connections that were being made.
Well, so how did California government apparatus respond to these strikes?
The response from CDCR, from the California government, from the state, was at first to resist, to ignore the hunger strikers, ignore the protests, dismiss it. And then, as you see in the film, to try to eventually negotiate an end to the protests once the families started kind of creating a bunch of noise on the streets, getting some media attention. So you see, one of the top prison officials meet with some of the protesters and try to negotiate an ending by offering things like winter caps. California-Oregon border up north, it gets pretty cold. For a long time, these guys weren't allowed to take photos of themselves to send home to their families. So allowing them to take 1 photo a year. In the end, during the 2013 hunger strike that blew up to 30,000 people, once that happened, once guys started going 50 plus days on the strike, at the end of that, the California prison system finally conceded that this system, this validation system, was wrong. And eventually, through a legal settlement, the California state released almost 4,000 people from solitary confinement. And then once they got out of solitary confinement, it made it easier to parole. And then that's how a lot of them were able to eventually get released. Someone like Jack Morris went into the prison system as a teenager and then spent 30 plus years in solitary confinement and finally is coming out into the world as a man in his 60s. And that's when we came across him.
And I'll also add, the gang validation system was found to be, unjust and unfair by the settlement. That same system is still being used to deny people parole. So this is an ongoing thing that we're witnessing and an ongoing struggle for many individuals and their families.
Did that decision have an effect in other states, or was that strictly California?
This was strictly California. This was a settlement in federal court, the Ashker case.
So actually, they didn't really get legislative relief. It had to come to a lawsuit. Is that correct?
That is correct. There was a moment in time where there was an attempt at legislative relief, but that was ultimately unsuccessful. And so, there was a class action lawsuit that JoeBill mentioned that was happening in parallel with the hunger strikes. That was initiated by people in the SHU and who ultimately partnered with the Center for Constitutional Rights. And they won the settlement following the hunger strikes.
Unfortunately, Pelican Bay was one of the first supermax prisons, and since Pelican Bay, there have been many more that have been built. How many supermax prisons are there now about, do you know?
I think we saw over 60 supermax prisons being built since the
Wow.
1980s.
Do you think that the building of these supermax prisons results in a self-fulfilling prophecy where they have to fill up the prisons that are being built?
I think very much so. Prison systems are essentially bureaucracies that need to justify themselves. Once you have a prison, you're going to want to fill it. And so I think that's why we see a lot of activism around prison construction right now. We've been bringing the film all around the country and in different localities. Bellingham, Washington, they're fighting prison construction. Lincoln, Nebraska, they're fighting prison construction out of that exact fear. Because once you invest all the capital in building such a massive structure, it is going to be used, and it takes a long time to shut down a prison. California went through one of the most massive prison building programs in the world in the 1980s, and only just now is the state maybe going to close one prison. And then,
Wow.
with immigrant detention centers right now under the new
Mm-hmm.
administration, there's also talks about doubling the capacity of the immigrant prisons. And that's exactly the conversation being had right now. Where I live in the Bay Area, they're maybe going to open an ICE detention center. And that's the exact fear is, well, once it's there, it's going to be filled.
Well, as grim as this subject is, the way you've put together the film, you bring it full circle in a way. The ending has a wonderful surprise. I'm not going to spoil it here, but it's absolutely delightful. And it's not a societal or political surprise, but a terrific personal event. Did you know beforehand that was how you would end the film, or did it only occur as you were filming?
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Oh my
Again,
gosh.
don't want to spoil the ending
Yeah.
either. But that's just one of those. The documentary gods were smiling on us.
There's a lot we were doing in this film. We're telling a collective story of resistance. We're shining a light on how bureaucracies absolve themselves of responsibility. But it's also deeply personal and individual stories of surviving solitary confinement, but also life afterwards. And I think what solitary confinement really teaches us is the power of human relationships. We are nothing if not our relationships with other human beings, and that's what makes the practice so sinister. So on the flip side of that, we got to talk to some of these men after their experience of decades of solitary confinement, after prison, back in the real world, connecting with their families. And it was really profound, and we witnessed some really special stories about the rebuilding of human relationships.
Well, as we wrap up, what's the most important thing for each of you that you know about that hunger strike?
For me, it's the power of collective solidarity, of multiracial working class people coming together in coalition to make material change in their lives. I think there's so much to be learned in that and so much inspiration that we need in our world going forward.
I would kind of piggyback on that and say that looking at our current political environment right now and thinking about what needs to happen for radical social change, I think that this story, this film, what these men in solitary confinement under the sort of most impossible restrictions were able to pull off is really a big inspiration and could be a North Star for another big radical social movement.
How can listeners see the film?
We're really excited that we are going to have our national broadcast on PBS next month. It's going to be on Independent Lens, Monday, February 3rd. It will be broadcast into households across the country, also prisons across the country because it is public television. It will also be available online via the PBS app or the PBS YouTube channel for 3 months after February 3rd. And we really hope everyone can check it out.
Great, great. Any last words?
Thank you so much, Jack, for taking the time. We think this is a really, really important story in California, U.S., and world history that is still not well known enough. And we are really excited to be able to share it with your audiences and folks around the country and around the world.
Great. I'm so happy to have spoken with you. Thanks so much, JoeBill and Lucas. I've been speaking with JoeBill Munoz and Lucas Guilkey, co-directors of a stunning film documentary, The Strike. It's a gripping true story that will leave you inspired by the possibility of resistance and victory under some of the most brutal conditions. This is Jack Shalom for Arts Express with host Prairie Miller.
Commerce and trade might be quite beneficial, but Marxists are a girl's best friend. A tax cut is fine, but it don't pay the rental on your humble flats, or overthrow those autocrats. Callous cash gives me a rash. Don't the bucks lose its bang in the end? Know that rising tides don't lift all boats, and Marxists are a girl's best friend. I long for a world that is pure and utopic, but governments are better bet. Socialists, time rolls on. And Mars is gone, and the left don't know where to begin. And this experiment that's capitalist but
That's Arts Express with host Prairie Miller, where art meets politics. And if you're down with the status quo, take the local.
And now on Arts Express, at our UK desk, a look at both the eminent and enigmatic late filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky and how his conflicted artistic journey in distancing himself from both political filmmaking in the Soviet Union and later the commercial dominance and imperatives in the West, which he likewise denounced as the market's, quote, petty bourgeois mentality, and entangled Tarkovsky within cinema, its personal, political, and capitalist contradictions, and turning to the mystical as if wandering lost through his own cinematic landscapes.
Good evening and welcome to the UK desk for Arts Express with me, your host, Jack Clark. Tonight we step into the world of one of cinema's most enigmatic visionaries, the master of time, memory, and the existential fog, Andrei Tarkovsky. A filmmaker who turned repression into poetic resistance, who made cinema feel less like storytelling and more like standing in a cathedral of the subconscious. And guiding us through this cinematic theology is Sergei Toymentsev, assistant professor of Russian at St. Louis University, and a man who has spent years untangling the philosophy, politics, and sheer spiritual heft of Tarkovsky's work, offering a new look of Russian cinema that places Tarkovsky at its metaphysical core. Tonight we'll be looking at Tarkovsky's battles with censorship, his obsession with time as something more than just a function of film, and why his work, despite its deliberate pace and deep philosophical leanings, still speaks so loudly in an age of distraction. Sergei Toymentsev, thank you for joining me on the show tonight. Now, Tarkovsky's films, such as Andrei Rublev and Stalker, delve into themes of spirituality and metaphysical inquiry, often clashing with the materialist ideology of Soviet society. How do you see his works navigating or subverting Soviet dogma while still being deeply rooted in Russian spiritual traditions?
It is tempting to view Tarkovsky as some kind of dissident, since none of his films are representative of Soviet ideology or socialist realist style. But in the 60s, in the 1960s, when Tarkovsky started his career, Soviet dogma was not that omnipresent or aggressive. This was the most liberal time in Soviet history, except perestroika, of course. Soviet history and Russian history in general have been developing some kind of cycles, in which each authoritarian regime is always followed by a more liberal one, which later nevertheless transitions to yet another autocracy. So after Stalin's death, Nikita Khrushchev introduced a lot of liberal policies which opened the country to many outside and previously forbidden influences. And it was somewhat cool, fashionable to be a rebel during that time. And Tarkovsky was that kind of rebel. He was essentially the product of his time. He was always interested in non-Soviet stuff like European, so-called bourgeois music, art, cinema, philosophies, not necessarily Western, but also Eastern philosophies. And Orthodox Christianity was one of his interests. It was, of course, forbidden by Stalin. But during Khrushchev's period, the so-called thaw, restrictions became much looser and allowed people more freedom for religious and cultural expression. So when Tarkovsky pitched his Andrei Rublev project to the Soviet authorities, it was approved because the political climate was favorable enough at that time. Yet the movie was shelved for 5 years after its completion because the new General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev redirected the country to its previous autocratic course. Nevertheless, it was still possible to make movies outside the Soviet dogma in the 70s, and Tarkovsky's Stalker is a great example of this. So in the 70s, he was very much interested in Zen Buddhism, so he tried to synthesize Orthodox Christianity in Zen Buddhism, and we can find much evidence of that in Stalker. And because of a great emphasis on spirituality in his films, we may certainly view them as you said, as spiritual theology, but I wouldn't say that these films were against the materialist ideology of Soviet society, because Soviet totalitarianism valued culture very highly by investing in it financially and ideologically. In the Soviet Union, all education was free, and one could do arts and sports besides school for free as well.
Now, coming to another point is Tarkovsky famously faced battles with Soviet censors, yet his films emerged as some of the most ambitious and philosophical works of their time. What lessons can today's filmmakers, especially those working under oppressive regimes, learn from Tarkovsky's ability to navigate censorship while maintaining artistic integrity?
He had very many ideas for movies, and he couldn't realize them precisely because of the Soviet censorship. Bergman, for example, completed over 60 films, and Sakharov completed by now over 50 films, and Tarkovsky made only 7. And it is partly because of his constant fights with the censors. He left the Soviet Union precisely with the intent that he could make more movies outside Russia. He even called his diary martyrology, because he considered himself a martyr of the Soviet censorship. Nevertheless, despite the traumatic effect of the censorship on him, let's not forget that all his Soviet movies were funded by the state, right? Furthermore, he shot his Stalker twice or even 3 times because the film turned out to be defective, and such excessive expenses were also covered by the state. The case with Stalker was kind of unprecedented. So when I read Tarkovsky complaints over his battle with the censors, I can't really take them seriously, since he completely ignored the financial aspect of film production in the Soviet Union. Those who paid for a movie were also responsible for checking it if it beats the Soviet ideological criteria after it's completed. But Tarkovsky was of a very high opinion of himself, considering himself a creator beyond any censorship, finally refusing to compromise with any cuts. This, I think, was a bit of juvenile, Had he been more flexible and agreeable with the censors, he could have made more movies, So the lesson here for today's filmmakers is rather negative. Not to follow Tarkovsky's example, no matter how genius you are, and find ways for compromise.
Tarkovsky often avoided overt political statements, yet his works, particularly The Sacrifice and Stalker, can be read as deeply political in their existential concerns. In light of Putin's government, Sergei, the Ukraine war, do you see Tarkovsky's influence inspiring a new wave of politically charged Russian filmmakers, akin to maybe the Soviet IV era of cinema?
Yeah, Tarkovsky, you're right. Tarkovsky often avoided overt political statements, and I would say more, he was overtly apolitical because politics was a vulgar thing to him. He was into his transcendence business. But I heard that his Sacrifice was discussed a lot as a political film, especially in the context of current nuclear threat to the world, and the same concerns Stalker in terms of our climate change crisis. I honestly think that Tarkovsky's influence would not help contemporary Russian filmmakers to express their political concerns. Furthermore, it would be counterintuitive because the very word spirituality is very much corrupt in Russia. For example, Russian Orthodox Church endorsed Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and many public figures there advocate Russia's spiritual superiority in the world. So yeah, it's the word spirituality is kind of toxic for me in Russia. So, and if you follow Tarkovskyan spiritual line, that would actually serve Putin's regime. For example, another example, Nikolai Burlaev, who played Boriska in Andrei Rublev, right now wholeheartedly supports the war while being an extremely religious person, So Tarkovsky's influence, I think, would only harm politically minded filmmakers right now. And if such influence is still possible, it must necessarily be mediated by von Trier's cynicism. So yeah, it has to be explosive, shocking. So yeah, but not imitative.
Tarkovsky's depiction of women in films like Mirror and Solaris have been critiqued for being archetypal or secondary to male protagonists. How would you evaluate the role of women in Tarkovsky's cinema? And do you think there are feminist reinterpretations of his films that deserve more attention?
Well, I agree that all women in Tarkovsky films are depicted unfavorably. Yeah, we see them as like very dependent, hysterical, and secondary to male roles. And if you read Tarkovsky's diary, yeah, you may find lots of misogynistic remarks about women. That's not good, of course. But I still think that feminist reinterpretations of his films are possible. First of all, Tarkovsky rejects hegemonic masculinity, as we can see in Andrei Rublev and Stalker. So Andrei Rublev uses to act, refuses to speak, right? And he just observes and intentionally takes a passive position on everything. Only after a long period of passivity, he actually decides to create. I'm not saying this is feminist. I'm just saying that this is against hegemonic masculinity. And in Stalker, Alexander Kaidanovsky, who was cast for the role of Stalker, complained a lot how he actually had to work on himself, suppress his masculinity a lot, because before he was mostly playing action roles. Yeah, he was actually quite in the demand for action films, but he crushed himself so completely. He transformed himself completely, and he turned into some, I don't know, some kind of saint, some kind of knight of faith, And after that, he decided to be a filmmaker. So yeah, Tarkovsky crushed him, and to look at nature in Tarkovskian way, to look at nature and align with it, like in a more ecological, eco-critical way, because there's a lot of self-identification with nature. I'm not sure this is a feminine or masculine, but it's definitely not masculine. It's not even human, to align with nature. I remember reading an article in which contemporary feminist filmmakers adopt this perspective on nature and trying to merge with it in a Tarkovskian way, and they find this as a feminist move.
Additionally, keeping on some points here, Sergei, the Russian filmmaker Larissa Shipko, do you think her feminine perspective complicates or complements Tarkovsky's more masculine universalist vision of spirituality?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do not find any feminism in Shepitko, actually, and she actually rejected herself. She wouldn't call herself as a female filmmaker. She was striving towards more universal filmmaker. There was no term like women director for her. So yeah, she was trying to suppress this gender distinction at all. And maybe some of her early films like Wings are made from the female perspective because the protagonist herself is a woman. Yeah, but if I study that moment, I would say that so she was not paying enough attention to the gender issue in her works. She was trying to operate with universal narratives and universal terms. Yeah, that's my impression.
Sergei Toymentsev, thank you for joining me on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
And if Tarkovsky taught us anything, it's that history repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as another bleakly poetic tracking shot. For those looking to go even deeper into Russian cinema, keep an eye out for Sergei's upcoming book, Refocused, the films of Alexander Sokurov, where another visionary filmmaker wrestles with history, power, and the ghosts of the past. I've been Jack Clark for Arts Express, with your host, Prairie Miller.